The melody drifted across the darkening prairie like smoke from a campfire, sweet and unexpected. And Kyle Brennan pulled his horse to an abrupt stop when he realized someone was singing to his cattle. He had been riding back from the northern pasture of his ranch outside Paso Robles, California, tired from a long day of mending fences and checking water holes in the August heat of 1883. The sun was setting behind the coastal hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and he had been looking forward to a hot meal and his bedroll. Instead, he found himself frozen in place, listening to the most beautiful voice he had ever heard floating through the twilight air. The cattle had gathered near the fence line, their usual restlessness at dusk completely absent. They stood peacefully, some with their heads lowered, others chewing cud with lazy contentment. Kyle dismounted quietly, tying his mare to a fence post, and moved toward the sound on foot. His boots made soft sounds in the dry grass as he walked carefully, not wanting to startle whoever was creating this unexpected music. As he rounded a large oak tree, he saw her. A young woman sat on the middle rail of his fence, her back straight, her head tilted slightly upward as she sang. Her dark hair fell in waves past her shoulders, catching the last rays of sunlight. She wore a simple cotton dress, pale blue and dusty from travel, and her hands rested gently on the weathered wood of the fence. The cattle had formed a semicircle around her, at least 30 head, all standing peacefully as if transfixed by her voice. Kyle stood there, hat in his hands without realizing he had removed it, and listened. The song was something old, something that sounded like it came from across the ocean, with words he did not entirely understand but feelings he recognized immediately. Loneliness, longing, hope, and something else he could not quite name. Her voice rose and fell with the natural ease of someone who had been singing since childhood, clear and pure in the evening air. When the song ended, the silence that followed felt heavy with meaning. The cattle shifted slightly, as if waking from a dream. Kyle cleared his throat, immediately regretting the sound when the woman startled and nearly fell from the fence. He rushed forward instinctively, catching her elbow to steady her. "I am sorry," he said quickly. "I did not mean to frighten you." She pulled her arm back gently but firmly, her green eyes wide as she looked up at him. Kyle realized he was standing too close and took a step back, holding his hands up in a gesture of peace. "I did not realize anyone was near," she said, her voice holding the same musical quality it had during her singing, though now it trembled slightly with alarm. "I was just passing through and I saw the cattle, and they seemed so peaceful, and I thought perhaps they might enjoy a song." "They certainly did," Kyle said, unable to keep the smile from his face. "I have never seen them so calm at this hour. Usually they are restless, moving around, making noise. You put them into some kind of spell." She smiled then, and Kyle felt something shift in his chest. "My grandmother always said that music soothes all living creatures. I suppose she was right." "I am Kyle Brennan," he said, extending his hand. "This is my ranch." She hesitated only a moment before taking his hand. Her grip was firm, her palm slightly calloused. "Grace Foster. I truly am sorry for trespassing. I have been walking most of the day and I saw this beautiful spot and I just could not help myself." "Walking from where?" Kyle asked, concern creeping into his voice. The nearest town was Paso Robles, a good 5 miles to the south, and there was nothing but empty land to the north for even farther. Grace looked down, and Kyle saw something complicated pass across her face. "From town. I arrived on the train this morning, and I have been trying to find my way to the Patterson place. I was told they might need help with their children, that Mrs. Patterson has been unwell." Kyle knew the Pattersons, an older couple who lived another 3 miles west of his property. They did have a passel of grandchildren who had come to stay with them after their daughter passed from fever the previous winter. But it was nearly dark now, and Grace would never make it before nightfall. "The Patterson place is too far to walk tonight," he said carefully. "The land between here and there is rough, and there are coyotes, sometimes worse. You should not be out alone after dark." Grace lifted her chin, and Kyle saw pride flash in her eyes. "I am quite capable of taking care of myself, Mr. Brennan." "I have no doubt of that," he said, choosing his words with care. "But capable or not, it would be foolish to continue in the dark. My ranch house is just over that rise. My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, keeps a room ready for travelers. You could stay the night, have a proper meal, and I will take you to the Patterson place in the morning." He could see her weighing the offer, pride against practicality. Finally, she nodded. "That is very kind of you. I accept, thank you." They walked together toward where Kyle had tied his horse, the cattle watching them with large, placid eyes. Kyle noticed Grace limping slightly and realized she must have been walking far longer than just from town. "You can ride," he offered, gesturing to his mare. "I will walk alongside." "I cannot take your horse," Grace protested. "You are not taking it, I am offering it. There is a difference." He smiled at her, and after a moment she smiled back. Kyle helped her mount, trying not to notice the way his hands fit around her waist, the way she felt when he lifted her. Once she was settled in the saddle, he took the reins and began walking, leading the horse toward home. "How did you learn to sing like that?" he asked as they walked, wanting to hear her voice again, even in conversation. "My mother," Grace said softly. "She was from Ireland, came over when she was just a girl. She knew hundreds of songs, old ones from the old country. She taught me all of them." Kyle heard the past tense. "She passed 3 years ago, consumption. My father went not long after, though the doctor said it was his heart. I think it was more that he could not bear to be without her." Grace's voice held old grief, worn smooth by time but still present. "I am sorry," Kyle said, meaning it. "And you?" Grace asked. "Have you always been a rancher?" "My father started this ranch when I was just a boy. He came out here in the early days, staked a claim, built it up from nothing. I learned everything from him. He passed 5 years ago, left it all to me." Kyle paused, remembering. "My mother went back east after that to live with her sister in Boston, said she had had enough of the frontier life." "That must have been difficult," Grace said gently. "It was what she needed. We write letters. She is happy there and I am happy here. Sometimes that is how life works out." They crested the rise and the ranch house came into view. It was a sturdy structure, built of wood and stone, with a wide porch across the front and smoke rising from the chimney. Lamplight glowed in the windows, warm and welcoming. Beyond the house stood the barn, the bunkhouse where his ranch hands stayed, and various other outbuildings. Mrs. Cheng came out onto the porch when she heard them approach, wiping her hands on her apron. She was a small woman, probably 60 years old, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and a manner that was both efficient and kind. She had come to work for Kyle's father 20 years earlier, after her husband died in a mining accident, and had become as much a part of the ranch as the land itself. "This is Miss Grace Foster," Kyle called out as they approached. "She has been walking all day and needs a place to stay for the night. I told her we could help." Mrs. Chen's expression softened immediately. "Of course. Come in, child. You must be exhausted. I will prepare the guest room and get you some supper." Kyle helped Grace down from the horse, again noticing the slight wince when her feet touched the ground. Mrs. Chen noticed too and immediately ushered Grace toward the house, clucking like a mother hen. "You men and your walking," she said, though her tone was not unkind. "Come, let us get you off those feet." Kyle took care of his horse, unsaddling and brushing her down, giving her feed and water. By the time he finished and made his way into the house, Grace was seated at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, and Mrs. Chen was bustling around preparing food. Grace had removed her shoes, and Kyle could see that her feet were indeed blistered and swollen. "Mrs. Chen," he said quietly, "do we have anything for her feet?" "Already taken care of," the housekeeper replied. "After she eats, I will soak them in salt water and wrap them properly. She will be able to walk tomorrow, though I do not recommend it." Grace looked embarrassed. "I am truly fine. I have walked farther than this before." "In shoes that did not fit properly," Mrs. Chen said, not asking but stating. "When did you eat last?" Grace hesitated. "This morning. I had some bread before I left the boarding house in town." Mrs. Chen shook her head and ladled stew into 2 bowls, placing one in front of Grace and one at Kyle's usual spot. "Eat, both of you, and no arguments." Kyle sat down across from Grace, and they ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. The stew was thick with beef and vegetables, warm and satisfying. He watched Grace eat, noticing how she tried to maintain proper manners even though she was clearly ravenous. "So you came all the way to California for a position with the Pattersons?" he asked. Grace nodded, swallowing before she spoke. "I saw an advertisement in a San Francisco newspaper. I have been working in the city for the past year, but I wanted to get away from the crowds, the noise. I thought perhaps the country would suit me better." "What were you doing in San Francisco?" "Working in a dress shop, sewing mostly. I am good with a needle and the work was steady, but the city—" She trailed off, looking down at her bowl. "The city was not for me." Kyle understood. He had been to San Francisco twice in his life, and had been grateful to return to his ranch both times. The press of people, the constant noise, the smell of too many bodies in too small a space, it all made him appreciate the open land of his home even more. "Paso Robles is not much of a city," he said with a smile. "Just a few streets, some shops, a hotel, a couple of saloons. Most of the people around here are ranchers or farmers. It is quiet, peaceful. You might find it too quiet after San Francisco." "I think I would find it perfect," Grace said, and the longing in her voice told Kyle she meant it. After supper, Mrs. Chen shooed Kyle out of the kitchen and took Grace upstairs to the guest room. Kyle went out to the porch, settling into his father's old rocking chair, and lit his pipe. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. He could hear the cattle in the distance, settled now for the night, and the occasional call of an owl from the oak trees. He thought about Grace's voice, the way it had sounded across the prairie, the way it had calmed his cattle and stirred something in him he thought had gone dormant. Kyle was 32 years old, had been running this ranch alone for 5 years, and had convinced himself that he was content with his solitary life. Now, after just an hour in Grace's company, he was questioning that contentment, when Mrs. Cheng came out to the porch. She sat in the chair next to him, something she only did when she had something important to say. "That girl has been through hardship," she said without preamble. "Her clothes are worn but well mended. Her hands show work, hard work. And she has the look of someone who has been alone for too long." "She said her parents passed," Kyle replied. "More than that. She has the look of someone who has no one. No family, no friends, just herself against the world. I know that look. I wore it myself once." Mrs. Chen paused. "She is also one of the kindest souls I have met. While I was tending her feet, she kept thanking me, apologizing for the trouble, asking if there was anything she could do to help. That kind of gratitude comes from someone who is not used to receiving kindness." Kyle nodded, understanding what Mrs. Chen was not quite saying. "I will take her to the Pattersons tomorrow, as promised." The Pattersons are good people, but they are overwhelmed. 7 grandchildren under one roof, and Mr. Patterson's rheumatism getting worse every year. That girl will work herself to the bone there." "What would you have me do?" Kyle asked, though he suspected he already knew. "I am not getting any younger," Mrs. Chen said. "This house is too big for one old woman to manage properly, and you could use help with the books, the correspondence, all the things your mother used to handle. Just think about it." She stood and went back inside, leaving Kyle alone with his thoughts and the night sky. He sat there for a long time, smoking his pipe and thinking about a woman who sang to cattle, and the way his quiet life suddenly felt like it might become something more. The next morning, Kyle woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. He dressed quickly and went downstairs to find Grace already in the kitchen, helping Mrs. Chen prepare breakfast. She wore the same blue dress, now brushed clean, and her hair was braided and pinned up. Her feet were wrapped in bandages, but she moved around the kitchen with easy grace. "You should be resting," Kyle said from the doorway. Grace turned, and her smile was bright in the morning light streaming through the windows. "I have rested, Mrs. Chen was kind enough to let me sleep in a real bed with real sheets, and I feel wonderful. The least I can do is help with breakfast." She would not take no for an answer, Mrs. Chen added, though she looked pleased. Stubborn as a mule, this one. They ate together, the 3 of them, and Kyle found himself enjoying the company more than he had expected. Grace asked questions about the ranch, about the cattle, about the land, and her interest seemed genuine. She told stories about San Francisco, about the dress shop and the characters she had met there, making both Kyle and Mrs. Chen laugh. After breakfast, Kyle prepared the wagon for the trip to the Patterson place. Grace gathered her small bundle of possessions, just a single worn carpet bag that looked like it held everything she owned in the world. Mrs. Chen had packed a basket of food for the Pattersons and had included some salve for Grace's feet. "You take care of yourself, Mrs. Chen said, hugging Grace tightly. "And if things do not work out there, you remember you have a place here." Grace's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. "Thank you for everything. I will not forget your kindness." The ride to the Patterson place took about an hour. The morning was beautiful, cool and clear, with a breeze coming in from the coast. Grace sat next to Kyle on the wagon seat, and they talked easily, as if they had known each other far longer than just one evening. "Would you sing something?" Kyle asked as they rode. "I mean, if you do not mind. Your voice is just so beautiful, and it seems a shame to waste this fine morning in silence." Grace blushed but nodded. She began to sing, something different from the night before, a happier tune about springtime and new love. Her voice rose clear and sweet into the morning air, and Kyle felt his heart lifting with it. He realized with sudden clarity that he did not want this ride to end, did not want to deliver Grace to the Pattersons and return to his empty house. When they arrived at the Patterson place, chaos greeted them. Children were running everywhere, ranging in age from about 4 to 12. The house, though large, looked overwhelmed, with laundry hanging everywhere and the sound of crying coming from inside. Mr. Patterson came out, leaning heavily on a cane, his face lighting up when he saw Grace. "Miss Foster, we have been expecting you," he said, his voice warm but tired. "Welcome, welcome. We surely need the help." Mrs. Patterson appeared in the doorway, a baby on her hip and flower in her hair. She looked exhausted but managed a smile. "Oh, thank the Lord. Come in, dear. I hope you are ready for hard work because we have plenty of it." Kyle helped Grace down from the wagon and carried her bag to the porch. He could see her taking in the scene, the overwhelming nature of what she was walking into, but her expression remained calm and determined. "Mr. Brennan," she said, turning to him, "thank you for your hospitality and for bringing me here safely. I am in your debt." no debt, Kyle said. It was my pleasure, truly. He wanted to say more, wanted to ask her to reconsider to come back to his ranch instead, but the Pattersons were watching, and it was not his place. He tipped his hat to everyone, climbed back onto the wagon, and started home. The next 2 weeks were among the longest of Kyle's life. He threw himself into work, spending long days in the saddle, checking cattle, mending fences, doing all the tasks that came with running a ranch. But in the quiet moments, in the evenings when he sat on his porch, he thought about Grace. He wondered if she was happy at the Pattersons, if she was being treated well, if she was managing with all those children. Mrs. Chen noticed his distraction but said nothing, just watched him with knowing eyes. His ranch hands noticed too. One evening, his foreman, a grizzled old cowboy named Tom, sat down next to him on the porch. "Boss, I have known you since you were knee-high to a grasshopper," Tom said. "And I have never seen you this distracted. What is eating at you?" Kyle considered denying it but realized there was no point. "There is a woman," he said simply. Tom laughed, a big booming sound. "Well, it is about time. Tell me about her." So Kyle did, telling Tom about finding Grace singing to the cattle, about her voice, about the way she had helped Mrs. Chen without being asked, about the easy conversation during the ride to the Pattersons. "So why is she at the Pattersons and not here?" Tom asked when Kyle finished. "Because she went there for a job and I had no right to interfere." "No right?" Tom shook his head. "Boy, sometimes you have to make your own right. If you care about this woman, you need to let her know. Otherwise, you are just going to sit here pining away, and that does not do anyone any good." Kyle knew Tom was right, but he also knew he needed a reason to see Grace again, something that did not seem like he was chasing after her like some lovesick fool. The reason presented itself 3 days later when Mrs. Patterson came to his ranch, looking harried and worried. "Mr. Brennan," she said, accepting the coffee Mrs. Chen offered. "I need to ask a favor. My sister in Los Angeles has taken ill quite seriously. I need to go to her, but I cannot leave Mr. Patterson alone with all those children. He is doing his best, but his health is not good, and Miss Foster, wonderful as she is, cannot manage everything alone." "What can I do to help?" Kyle asked, already knowing what he was going to offer. "Would it be possible for Miss Foster and the children to stay here for a week or two? Just until I return. I know it is a tremendous imposition, but we are desperate. I will pay, of course." Kyle waved away the mention of payment. "No need for that. We have room, and Mrs. Chen would probably enjoy having children around. Tell me when you need to leave, and I will bring everyone here." The relief on Mrs. Patterson's face was profound. "Thank you, Mr. Brennan. You are a godsend. I need to leave tomorrow morning. The train leaves at 9. The next morning, Kyle arrived at the Patterson place with the largest wagon he owned. The children were already packed, such as it was, and Grace was organizing everything with remarkable efficiency. When she saw Kyle, her face lit up, and he felt his heart do that strange lifting thing again. "Mr. Brennan," she said, coming over to the wagon. "Mrs. Patterson told me about your generous offer. I want you to know how much we appreciate it." "It is no trouble," Kyle said, jumping down from the wagon. "We have plenty of room, and it will be good to have some life in the house." Getting 7 children, their belongings, and Grace loaded into the wagon was an adventure. The youngest, a girl named Emmy, was just 3 and decided she was scared of Kyle's beard. It took Grace singing a soft song to calm her down enough to get her settled. The oldest boy, James, who was 12, kept asking Kyle questions about ranching and cattle and horses, his eyes bright with interest. The ride back to the ranch was noisy and chaotic, nothing like the peaceful journey Kyle had taken with Grace 2 weeks earlier. But he found he did not mind. Grace sat up front with him again, with Emmy on her lap and the other children in the back. She managed to keep them entertained with songs and stories, her patience seemingly endless. Mrs. Chen had prepared for their arrival, making up beds in every spare room and cooking enough food to feed a small army. The children were initially shy, but she won them over with cookies and kind words. By evening they were all settled, fed and put to bed, and Kyle finally had a moment alone with Grace. They sat on the porch together, the night warm and filled with the sound of crickets. Grace looked tired but content. "Thank you for this," she said softly. "The Pattersons have been kind, but it has been difficult. 7 children are a lot to manage, especially when some of them are still grieving their mother." "How have you been managing?" Kyle asked. "As best I can. I sing to them mostly. It seems to help." "Songs cannot replace a mother, but they can provide comfort." She paused. "I remember after my own mother passed, I would sing her songs and it made me feel like she was still with me somehow." Kyle found himself reaching out, covering her hand with his own. "You have a gift, Grace. The way you sing, the way you care for those children, it is something special." She looked at him, and in the lamplight from the window her eyes seemed to hold the stars. "You are kind to say so." "I am not being kind, I am being truthful." He hesitated, then decided to be brave. "I am glad you are here. I have thought about you every day since I took you to the Pattersons." Grace's breath caught. "You have?" "Every day," Kyle confirmed. "I found myself riding past their place, hoping to catch a glimpse of you. I made up excuses to go to town, thinking I might see you there. I have been acting like a schoolboy with his first crush." She laughed, but it was a gentle sound, not mocking. "I have thought about you too. About your ranch, about Mrs. Chen, about the peace I felt here. At the Pattersons, there is always noise, always chaos. It is good work, important work, but I found myself missing the quiet, missing the sound of your voice." Kyle squeezed her hand gently. "Then stay. When Mrs. Patterson returns, when this is all over, stay here. Mrs. Chen really could use the help, and I could use someone to manage the household accounts and correspondence. And I would very much like to spend more time getting to know you." "You are offering me a job?" Grace asked, and Kyle could not quite read her tone. "I am offering you a home," he said carefully. "A job, yes, but more than that. A place where you belong, where you are wanted, where you could sing to the cattle every evening if you wanted to, and I would come and listen." Tears filled Grace's eyes and one spilled over, running down her cheek. "No one has offered me a home since my parents died. I have been drifting, trying to find where I fit, where I matter. Are you certain?" "I have never been more certain of anything," Kyle said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. Grace nodded, smiling through her tears. "Then yes. Yes, I will stay." Kyle wanted to pull her into his arms, to kiss her, but the moment felt too fragile, too new. Instead, he just held her hand and sat with her on the porch, listening to the night sounds and feeling like his life had finally found its proper direction. The next 2 weeks were a revelation. Grace fit into the household as if she had always been there. She managed the children with a perfect balance of firmness and kindness, keeping them occupied and out of trouble. She helped Mrs. Chen with the cooking and cleaning, took over the household accounts, which Kyle had been neglecting, and organized his correspondence with an efficiency that amazed him. But more than that, she filled the house with music. She sang while she worked, while she played with the children, in the evenings when everyone gathered in the parlor. The ranch hands would find excuses to come to the main house just to hear her. Even Tom, who claimed to be tone-deaf, would sit on the porch steps and listen with a soft smile on his weathered face. Kyle found himself making excuses to be near her. He would come in for lunch when he usually ate with the men. He would review the accounts with her every evening, sitting close at the desk. their shoulders almost touching. He would join the evening gatherings in the parlor, just to hear her sing and watch the way the lamplight played across her face. They talked, long conversations that stretched into the night after the children were in bed. Grace told him about growing up in a small mining town in Colorado, about watching her father work himself to exhaustion in the mines, about her mother's determination to teach her to read and write and sing. Kyle told her about building this ranch with his father, about the hard years and the good ones, about his dreams for the future. "I want to expand the herd," he said one evening. "Bring in some new breeding stock, improve the quality. Maybe buy some of the land to the north, give the cattle more room to graze. Build a life here that means something." "It already means something," Grace said softly. "Look at what you have built, what you have created. Your father would be proud." "I want more than just a successful ranch," Kyle admitted. "I want a family, children of my own, someone to build this life with, not just for." He looked at her directly. "I want you, Grace. I know it has only been a short time, but I am certain I want you to be that person." Grace set down her coffee cup, her hands trembling slightly. "Kyle, I want that too, more than I can say. But you need to understand something about me. I am not some delicate flower who needs protecting. I am strong, capable, and I have opinions about things. I will not be the kind of wife who just agrees with everything her husband says." "I would not want that," Kyle said, moving his chair closer to hers. "I want a partner, someone who will tell me when I am being a fool, who will share the decisions and the responsibilities. I have been alone for a long time, Grace, and I am good at it, but I do not want to be alone anymore." She reached out and touched his face, her palm warm against his cheek. "Neither do I." Kyle leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She did not. Their lips met softly, tentatively, and Kyle felt something settle into place in his soul. This was right. This was what had been missing. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "I should probably court you properly," Kyle said. "Take you to dances in town, bring you flowers, all the things a man is supposed to do." "You found me singing to your cattle and offered me a home," Grace said, laughing. "I think we can skip some of the traditional steps." "Still," Kyle said, taking her hand, "I want to do this right." "Grace Foster, would you allow me to court you with the intention of marriage?" "Kyle Brennan, I would be honored." They sealed it with another kiss, longer this time, and when Mrs. Cheng came in to check on them, she just smiled and quietly left the room. Mrs. Patterson returned 2 weeks later, her sister having recovered from her illness. She was surprised but pleased to hear that Grace would not be returning with the children. "I am happy for you, dear," she said, hugging Grace tightly. "You deserve a good life, and Kyle Brennan is a good man. You will be happy here." "I already am," Grace said, and it was true. The courtship, such as it was, lasted 3 months. Kyle did take Grace to dances in town, where she quickly became popular among the other ranch wives and townspeople. Her singing was requested at church socials and community gatherings. He brought her flowers from the wild meadows on his property. They rode together across the ranch, and he taught her about cattle and horses, while she taught him the songs her mother had taught her. On a cool evening in November, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Kyle got down on one knee and presented Grace with a ring that had belonged to his grandmother. "Will you marry me?" he asked simply. "Will you share this life with me, build a future together, fill this house with music and love and eventually children?" "Yes," Grace said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes to all of it." They were married in December in the small church in Paso Robles. Mrs. Cheng cried through the entire ceremony. Tom served as Kyle's best man, and Mrs. Patterson stood up with Grace. The Patterson children were there, along with what seemed like half the county. After the ceremony, There was a celebration at the ranch, with food and music and dancing that lasted into the night. When everyone finally left and Kyle carried Grace over the threshold of the house that was now legally theirs together, he felt a contentment he had never known before. They stood in the parlor, still in their wedding clothes, and Grace began to sing softly, the same song Kyle had heard that first evening when she was sitting on his fence. "That is the song you were singing to the cattle," he said. "It is a song about finding home," Grace explained. "About being lost and then found. It seemed appropriate then, and it seems even more appropriate now." Kyle pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. "Sing it for me," he said. "Not for the cattle, not for anyone else, just for me." So Grace sang, her voice filling their home, and Kyle held her and thought about how a chance encounter on a prairie evening had changed his entire life. He thought about how he had almost let her go, almost let pride and propriety keep him from following his heart. He thought about the future stretching out before them, full of possibility and promise. When the song ended, he kissed her, and they went upstairs together to begin their married life. The first year of marriage was an adjustment, as Kyle supposed all first years were. Grace had her own ideas about how the household should run, and sometimes those ideas conflicted with how things had always been done. But they learned to compromise, to communicate, to appreciate what each brought to the partnership. Grace took over all the household management, freeing Mrs. Chen to focus more on cooking and less on the endless details of running a large house. She organized Kyle's office, making sense of years of disorganized papers and receipts. She started a garden, saying she wanted fresh vegetables through the summer. She began teaching some of the ranch hands to read in the evenings, something Kyle had never thought to offer. But more than the practical contributions, she brought life to the ranch. The house that had been quiet and somewhat lonely became a home filled with laughter and music. Grace sang while she worked, and the sound would drift out across the ranch, making everyone who heard it smile. She organized social gatherings, inviting neighboring ranchers and their families for dinners and dances. She made friends easily, and soon the ranch became a center of social activity in the area. Kyle found himself happier than he had ever been. He would come in from a long day of work to find Grace waiting for him, often with something amusing to tell him about her day. They would eat dinner together, sometimes with Mrs. Chen and Tom joining them, sometimes just the two of them. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, talking about their days, making plans for the future, or just sitting in comfortable silence. At night, in the privacy of their bedroom, Kyle discovered depths of love and passion he had never imagined. Grace gave herself to him completely, without reservation, and he did the same. They learned each other's bodies, each other's needs, each other's hearts. In the spring, Grace started feeling unwell in the mornings. Mrs. Chen noticed before Grace said anything and smiled knowingly. When the doctor from town confirmed what they all suspected, Kyle thought his heart might burst from joy. "We are going to have a baby," Grace told him, her face glowing with happiness. "You are going to be a father." Kyle picked her up and spun her around, making her laugh and protest that he would make her dizzy, but he could not help himself. A baby. Their baby. The future he had dreamed of was becoming reality. The pregnancy was not easy. Grace was sick frequently in the early months, and Kyle worried constantly. Mrs. Chen had to keep reassuring him that this was normal, that Grace was strong and healthy, that women had been having babies since the beginning of time. But knowing that did not stop him from hovering, from insisting Grace rest, from trying to do everything for her. "Kyle, I am pregnant, not dying," Grace finally said one day, exasperated but amused. "I can still do things. In fact, I need to do things. I will go mad if you try to wrap me in cotton wool for the next 6 months." So Kyle learned to step back, to let Grace do what she needed to do while still being there if she needed him. He watched as her belly grew, as she began to move differently, as the reality of the baby became more and more apparent. He would lay his hand on her stomach at night and feel the baby kick, and the wonder of it never faded. In October, on a cool evening with the first hint of winter in the air, Grace went into labor. Mrs. Chen sent Tom to fetch the midwife from town, and Kyle paced the downstairs while the women took over the bedroom. The sounds from upstairs terrified him, Grace's cries of pain making him want to rush up there, but Mrs. Chen had been firm. He was to stay downstairs and let them do what needed to be done. After what felt like forever but was probably only 6 or 7 hours, he heard a new sound. A baby crying, strong and lusty. Kyle stood at the bottom of the stairs, his heart pounding, until Mrs. Chen appeared at the top. "You have a son," she said, beaming. "A healthy, beautiful boy, and Grace is fine. Tired but fine. Come meet your son." Kyle took the stairs 2 at a time. In the bedroom, Grace lay propped up against pillows, her hair damp with sweat, her face exhausted but radiant. In her arms was a small bundle wrapped in blankets. Kyle approached slowly, almost reverently. "Kyle," Grace said softly, "meet your son." She pulled back the blanket, and Kyle looked down at the smallest, most perfect thing he had ever seen. The baby had dark hair like Grace, a scrunched-up red face and tiny hands that waved in the air. As Kyle watched, one of those tiny hands grasped his finger, and he felt his eyes fill with tears. "He is perfect," Kyle whispered. "You are amazing, thank you." "We made him together," Grace said, smiling. "I think we should name him Kenneth after your father." Kyle had not expected that, and the gesture moved him deeply. "Kenneth Brennan," he said, trying it out. "Kenny, yes, I like that very much." He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, and Grace leaned against him. Together, they looked down at their son and felt the weight and wonder of what they had created. The years that followed were full and busy. Kenny grew into a sturdy, happy boy who loved the ranch and followed Kyle everywhere as soon as he could walk. 2 years after Kenny was born, Grace gave birth to a daughter they named Catherine, who had Grace's green eyes and musical voice. 3 years after that came another son, Kevin, who was quieter than his older brother but just as sweet. The ranch prospered. Kyle did expand the herd and buy additional land to the north. He brought in better breeding stock and became known throughout the region for the quality of his cattle. Grace managed the household with efficiency and warmth, creating a home that was always full of life and love. The children grew up surrounded by music. Grace sang to them from infancy, teaching them all the old songs her mother had taught her. By the time they were old enough to talk, they were singing along, their young voices blending with hers. Kyle would come in from working the ranch and find Grace at the piano they had bought. The children gathered around, all singing together, and he would stop and just listen, grateful beyond words for the life they had built. When Kenny was 7, Kyle started teaching him about ranching. The boy took to it naturally, just as Kyle had at that age with his own father. They would ride out together, Kyle explaining about the cattle, the land, the business side of ranching. Kenny absorbed it all, asking endless questions, eager to learn. Catherine was different. She loved the ranch but had no interest in cattle or horses beyond petting them. What she loved was music, just like her mother. By the time she was 5, she was making up her own songs, sitting at the piano and picking out melodies by ear. Grace taught her properly, and soon mother and daughter would perform duets that left everyone who heard them enchanted. Kevin, the youngest, was a puzzle. He was quieter than the other two, more thoughtful, always watching and listening. He loved books and would spend hours in Kyle's office, reading everything he could get his hands on. Kyle wondered if Kevin would be the one to leave the ranch, to seek his fortune in the wider world, and he made peace with that possibility. Each child had to find their own path. Mrs. Cheng grew older but remained a vital part of the household. She taught the children to cook and to appreciate good food. She told them stories about China, about the long journey she had made to America, about building a life in a new land. She was their beloved grandmother in all but blood, and they adored her. Tom eventually retired from active ranch work, but he stayed on, living in a small house Kyle had built for him near the main house. He was Uncle Tom to the children, teaching them to ride, to rope, to do all the practical skills they would need. He and Mrs. Chen would sit together on the porch in the evenings, two old friends who had seen a lot of life, content in their final years. As the children grew, Kyle and Grace faced the normal challenges of parenthood. There were illnesses and accidents, though nothing too serious. There were arguments and tears, slammed doors and teenage sullenness. But through it all, there was love and music and the solid foundation they had built together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Kyle surprised Grace by organizing a party at the ranch, inviting everyone they knew. When all the guests had arrived and dinner was served, Kyle stood up to make a toast. 10 years ago, he said, his voice carrying across the room, I was riding home across my land and I heard the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I found Grace sitting on my fence, singing to my cattle. I asked her to serenade me instead, and she has been doing so ever since. Every day with her has been a gift. She has given me a home, a family, a life beyond anything I could have imagined. So I want to raise a glass to my wife, to the woman who changed my life with her voice and her heart. To Grace. Everyone raised their glasses and Grace stood up, tears in her eyes. And I want to raise a glass to Kyle, she said, who found me when I was lost, who gave me a home when I had none, who has loved me every day since. To my husband, the best man I know. After the toast, Grace went to the piano. I am going to sing the song I was singing that first evening, she said. The song about finding home, because that is what Kyle gave me and I want everyone to know it. She began to sing, her voice as beautiful as it had been that evening 12 years earlier. Kyle stood next to the piano, watching her, and felt the same wonder he had felt then. Around them, their children, their friends, their family, all the people who made their life rich and full, listened in rapt silence when the song ended. Kyle pulled Grace into his arms and kissed her, not caring that everyone was watching. There was applause and laughter and a few good-natured whistles from the ranch hands, but Kyle only had eyes for Grace. I love you, he said simply. I love you too, she replied. Always. The years continued to pass. Kenny grew into a fine young man, taking on more and more responsibility on the ranch. At 20, he announced he wanted to marry Sarah, the daughter of a neighboring rancher. Kyle and Grace gave their blessing, and the wedding was held at the ranch, just as theirs had been. Catherine, true to her nature, moved to San Francisco when she was 18 to study music formally. It was hard to let her go, but Kyle and Grace knew she needed to follow her dreams. She wrote often, telling them about her studies, about the concerts she attended, about the life she was building. She came home for visits, filling the house with music and stories, then leaving again, drawn to the wider world. Kevin surprised everyone by deciding to go to university to study law. Someone needs to make sure ranchers like you and Kenny do not get cheated by the big companies, he said with a smile. Kyle was proud beyond measure, seeing his youngest son forge his own path with such determination. Mrs. Chen passed away peacefully in her sleep when Kyle was 45. It was the natural end of a long life, but it hit them all hard. She had been part of the family for so long that the house felt empty without her. They buried her in the small cemetery on the ranch, under an oak tree with a headstone that read, "Beloved friend and family." Tom followed 2 years later, his old body finally giving out. They buried him next to Mrs. Chen, and Kyle imagined them sitting together somewhere, watching over the ranch they had helped build. As Kyle and Grace grew older, they spent more time together and less time working. Kenny had taken over the day-to-day running of the ranch, and he was doing an excellent job. Kyle was proud to step back and let his son lead, offering advice when asked, but not interfering. Grace still sang, though her voice had aged, becoming richer and deeper but no less beautiful. She sang for the grandchildren now. Kenny and Sarah had given them 3 grandchildren, who loved spending time at the ranch and loved their grandmother's songs even more. On a summer evening, when Kyle was 55 and Grace was 52, they sat together on the porch, the same porch where they had sat so many times over the years. The sun was setting behind the hills, painting the sky in brilliant colors. In the distance, they could hear the cattle, and from the house behind them, the sound of their grandchildren playing. "You remember the first time we sat here together?" Kyle asked, holding Grace's hand. "Of course," Grace said, smiling. "You told me you had been thinking about me every day." "I thought you were just being charming." "I was being truthful," Kyle said. "And I have thought about you every day since then, too. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Grace." "You are the best thing that ever happened to me," Grace replied. "You gave me a home, a family, a life. You asked me to serenade you, and I have been happy to do so every day since." "Will you sing for me now?" Kyle asked. "That same song, the one you were singing that first evening." Grace nodded and began to sing, her voice floating out across the ranch, across the land they had built their life on. Kyle closed his eyes and listened, feeling the same peace and joy he had felt that first time, amplified by all the years they had shared. When the song ended, Kyle opened his eyes to find Grace watching him with love and tenderness. "I will keep singing for you as long as I have breath," she said. "And I will keep listening," Kyle replied, "as long as I have ears to hear." They sat together as the stars came out, holding hands, content in the life they had created, grateful for every moment they had been given. The ranch stretched out around them, prosperous and peaceful, a legacy for their children and grandchildren. The house behind them was full of family and love and the promise of more to come. Years later, when Kyle was 72 and Grace was 69, they celebrated their golden wedding anniversary. All 3 of their children came home for the celebration, along with their spouses and children. The ranch was full of family. 3 generations gathered to celebrate a love that had lasted half a century. Catherine, now a renowned music teacher in San Francisco, performed a concert with her mother, their voices blending beautifully despite the years. Kevin, now a successful lawyer, gave a toast that made everyone laugh and cry. Kenny, who had run the ranch successfully for years, presented his parents with a new rocking chair for the porch, made from oak wood from the tree where Grace had first sung to the cattle. As the celebration wound down and the younger family members put the children to bed, Kyle and Grace sat together on the porch in their new rocking chair, built for 2. The evening was warm and clear, much like that first evening 50 years earlier. 50 years, Grace marveled. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I was sitting on your fence, singing to your cattle. And I was standing there, hat in hand, mesmerized by the most beautiful woman I had ever seen," Kyle added. "You thought I was beautiful even covered in dust from walking all day," Grace teased. "I thought you were beautiful then, and I think you are beautiful now," Kyle said seriously. You have only become more so with time." Grace leaned her head on his shoulder. "We have had a good life, have we not?" "The best life," Kyle agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." "Do you ever wonder how different things would have been if you had not heard me singing that day? If you had taken a different route home?" Grace asked. "I do not wonder," Kyle said, "because it happened the way it was meant to happen. I found you, or maybe you found me, or maybe we found each other. However it happened, I am grateful." From inside the house, they could hear Catherine teaching her nieces and nephews a new song, their young voices bright with enthusiasm. Grace smiled. "Our legacy," she said. "Music and love passed down through the generations." "And the land," Kyle added. "The ranch built on hard work and dreams. All of it together," Grace agreed. "All of it intertwined just like our lives have been." As the stars came out, filling the sky with light, Kyle asked one more time, as he had asked countless times over the years, "Will you sing for me?" And Grace, as she had done countless times before, began to sing. The song about finding home, about being lost and then found, about love that lasts through time and trials. Her voice, aged but still beautiful, filled the night air, and Kyle held her close and listened. Their children and grandchildren came out onto the porch, drawn by the music. They gathered around, quiet and respectful, listening to Grace sing. When the song ended, there was a moment of perfect silence, and then Kenny started to applaud and everyone joined in. Grace stood and bowed, laughing, and then she pulled Kyle to his feet. "Dance with me," she said. "There is no music," Kyle protested, but he was already moving into position. "We will make our own," Grace said, and she began to hum, and Kyle held her and they danced on the porch, surrounded by family under the stars. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Kyle and Grace lay together in the darkness of their bedroom, holding hands as they had done every night for 50 years. "Promise me something," Grace said softly. "Anything," Kyle replied. "Promise me that no matter what happens, no matter how much time we have left, we will face it together, that we will hold onto each other and this love we have built." "I promise," Kyle said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. "Together, always." "Together, always," Grace echoed, and they fell asleep that way, hands clasped, hearts intertwined. Kyle and Grace were granted another decade together. They grew old with grace and dignity, supported by their children and surrounded by the love of their grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. The ranch continued to prosper under Kenny's leadership, the family name becoming synonymous with quality and integrity. Grace kept singing, even when her voice grew thin and wavering. She sang to the great-grandchildren, teaching them the old songs, keeping the tradition alive. Kyle kept listening, even when his hearing started to fade, because he could still feel the music, could still feel the love in every note. When Grace was 80, she developed a cough that would not go away. The doctor said it was pneumonia, that her lungs were weak, that they should prepare themselves. Kyle refused to accept it at first, but Grace was calm. "I have had a beautiful life," she told him, holding his hand in the bedroom they had shared for so many years. "More beautiful than I ever dreamed possible. I have no regrets, my love, none at all." "I am not ready to lose you," Kyle said, tears streaming down his face. "You will never lose me," Grace said gently. "I will always be with you, in the music, in the children, in the land we built our life on. Every sunset, every star, every breath of wind across the prairie, I will be there." She lasted another week, growing weaker each day. Their children came and their grandchildren, filling the house one last time with family. On the last evening, when the sun was setting and the sky was painted in brilliant colors, Grace asked Kyle to help her to the porch. He carried her, she weighed so little now, and settled her in their rocking chair. The family gathered around, quiet and sorrowful. Grace looked out across the ranch at the land she had called home for 6 decades, and she smiled. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "You are beautiful," Kyle replied, holding her hand. "Sing with me," Grace said. "One last time, sing with me." So they sang together, Kyle's voice rough and Grace's barely audible, the old song about finding home. Their children joined in, and their grandchildren, all the voices blending together in a chorus of love and memory. When the song ended, Grace leaned her head against Kyle's shoulder and closed her eyes. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," Kyle replied. "Always." Grace took one more breath, let it out slowly, and was gone. Kyle held her for a long time, rocking gently, tears streaming down his face. Around them, the family wept, but quietly, respecting the sacred moment. As the last light faded from the sky and the stars came out, Kyle finally stood, lifted Grace one last time, and carried her into the house. They buried Grace under the oak tree where she had first sung to the cattle, where their love story had begun. The funeral was attended by what seemed like the entire county, all the people whose lives she had touched with her music and her kindness. Kyle stood at the graveside, supported by his children, and said goodbye to the woman who had been his partner, his love, his life. After the funeral, Kyle moved through the days in a fog of grief. The house felt empty without Grace's music, without her laughter, without her presence. But he was not alone. Kenny and Sarah moved into the main house, insisting that Kyle not be by himself. The grandchildren visited constantly, and little by little, life began to return to something resembling normal. Kyle would sit on the porch in the evenings, in the rocking chair they had shared, and he would talk to Grace. He told her about his day, about the grandchildren, about the ranch. Sometimes he thought he could hear her voice on the wind, singing softly, and those moments brought him peace. One evening, about 6 months after Grace passed, Kyle's great-granddaughter Emma, who was just 7 years old, climbed into his lap as he sat on the porch. "Grandpa Kyle," she said, "will you tell me about Grandma Grace?" So Kyle told her. He told her about finding Grace singing to the cattle, about asking her to serenade him instead. He told her about their courtship, their wedding, the life they had built together. He told her about the music, always the music, and how Grace had filled their world with beauty. "She loved you very much," Emma said when he finished. "And I loved her," Kyle replied, "more than words could ever express." "She taught me a song before she got sick," Emma said. "Would you like to hear it?" Kyle nodded, not trusting his voice. Emma stood up and began to sing, her young voice clear and sweet. It was the song, the one Grace had been singing that first evening, the one about finding home. Kyle closed his eyes and listened, and for a moment, it was like Grace was there again. When Emma finished, she climbed back into Kyle's lap. "Grandma Grace said that love does not die, that it lives on in the people we love and the memories we make. She said that as long as we remember, as long as we sing the songs and tell the stories, love lasts forever." "She was right," Kyle said, holding his great-granddaughter close. "She was always right about the important things." Kyle lived for another 2 years after Grace passed. They were peaceful years, spent surrounded by family, watching the ranch continue to grow and prosper. He taught the grandchildren everything he could about ranching and about life. He told stories about Grace, keeping her memory alive, making sure that the younger generations knew the remarkable woman she had been. On a spring morning when the wildflowers were blooming and the air was sweet, Kyle did not wake up. Kenny found him in bed, peaceful, a slight smile on his face. On the nightstand beside him was a photograph of Grace, taken on their wedding day, her face radiant with happiness. They buried Kyle next to Grace, under the oak tree where their story had begun. The entire family gathered once more, 3 generations strong, to say goodbye to the man who had built their legacy. At the graveside, Catherine sang the old song, the one her mother had sung, the one that had brought her parents together. As her voice rose into the spring air, clear and beautiful, a breeze swept across the ranch, rustling the oak leaves and carrying the music out across the prairie. The cattle in the distance raised their heads and stood still, as if listening. And for a moment, everyone gathered there could have sworn they heard 2 voices singing together, harmonizing perfectly, echoing across the land they had loved. The ranch continued, passed down to Kenny and eventually to his children. The house remained a center of family life, always filled with music and love and the memories of Kyle and Grace. The old oak tree became a place of pilgrimage for the family, where they would go to remember, to reflect, to feel connected to the love story that had started it all. Years later, when Emma was grown with children of her own, she would bring them to the ranch and tell them the story of their great-great-grandparents. She would tell them about how Kyle found Grace singing to his cattle, about how he asked her to serenade him instead, about how that moment of music had created a legacy that lasted through generations. And then, Emma would sing the old song, teaching it to the youngest generation, making sure that the music never died, that the love story never ended. Because Grace had been right, love does last forever, carried forward in memory and song, in the land and the family, in every sunset over the prairie and every star in the sky. The story of Kyle and Grace became legend in Paso Robles, told and retold, a reminder that love can begin in the most unexpected moments and last beyond a lifetime. The ranch stood as testament to what 2 people could build together when they found each other at just the right moment, when they recognized in each other the missing piece of their own souls. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind blows just right across the prairie, people swear they can still hear singing carried on the breeze, a voice as clear and beautiful as it was over a century ago, still serenading the cowboy who loved her, still filling the world with music and joy and the enduring power of love.